further ado, let's go. So just so we're on the same page, the workshop goals are, at the end of this workshop, hopefully you'll be able to state the purpose of a data management plan. You'll decide if you need to write one and identify the components that go into writing one. And just to be really clear about what this workshop isn't, it's not a data management workshop. Although data management is an important part of data management plans, due to the time constraints of this workshop, we'll not be going into best practices and instead helping you focus on thinking about your data management needs. This is also not a step-by-step guide to writing a data management plan. So although data management plans are required by a lot of funding agencies, there isn't a standard. And so your plan might end up looking different from your colleagues. But hopefully this workshop will help you think about the data management components that are most important to your project so that you have a better sense of what you should be including in your plan when the time comes to write one. Okay, so what is a data management plan? So in 2013, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy released a memo on increasing access to the results of federally funded research. So although this memo directly impacts researchers receiving federal funding, all researchers can benefit from better data management planning, regardless of dissemination decision. So the memo specifically required researchers to better account for and manage their digital data resulting from federally funded scientific research to allow for improved public access and research transparency. You can read all about it if you feel so inclined. There is a link in the slides, but that's pretty much all you need to know at this point. Specifically, when funding organizations ask for a data management plan, they're asking for a 2-page document describing what you're going to do with your data during and after your research project. And data in this case is specifically factual information necessary to validate research findings. The reason we say this is that sometimes you may end up with data that's intermediate, or you might end up with information that's going back and forth between colleagues that isn't used for validating your research findings, and that under the definition is not considered data. So within the article, data is defined as digital recorded factual materials commonly accepted in the scientific community as necessary to validate research findings, including data sets used to support scholarly publications, but does not include things such as laboratory notebooks, preliminary analyses, drafts of scientific paper, plans for future research, peer review reports, communication with colleagues, or physical objects, such as laboratory specimens. Okay, so that being said, I want to encourage you to maybe think a little bit about your project, whether it's a project you're doing right now, or if it is a project that you're planning on conducting in the future, if you're planning on writing a data management plan, and think about what data do you expect to create or work with during your project? Will you be dependent on any software in order to access or work with the data in your project? And will you be dependent on any person for access or use of the data? If you'd like to take a moment to think about those questions, if you'd like to jot something down, feel free. If not, we can pause here if you have any questions for me. I'm just going to give you a few minutes to think about this. And I know these are a bit lofty questions and might seem overwhelming at this point. And if you don't know, just write, I'm not sure, or just go with your gut instinct. or what you think you might be encountering. And we'll explore them later on in greater depth. Okay, let me keep moving. Keep those questions in the back of your mind as we continue to explore further this topic in more detail. So, do you need to write a data management plan? We talked about how, there was this memo that came out that started the chain of events that had federal funding agencies require this. But do you specifically need to write one? And so here are some scenarios. I am applying to a federally funded grant. Do I need to write a data management plan? Possibly. So some federal agencies require a data management plan, but not all of them do. There's not a standard across all federal funding agencies, and there are some caveats even within federal funding agencies where some disciplines are required to write a data management plan and some aren't, or there's some specific guidance for certain disciplines, and some disciplines might have a more general set of requirements. So if you're submitting, so you might be submitting to a journal that requires a deposit into a data repository, or if you're considering sharing your data, if you're working with a large group of researchers from other universities or departments, or even if you have students collecting most of your data, or a PhD student running your lab, you're probably not required, but federally, if you're submitting a grant, to write a data management plan if you're not applying to a federally funded grant. However, I would strongly recommend that you consider it anyway. So data management planning, when working with a group of researchers, prompts communication and allows everyone to be on the same page. It's going to be like your framework for documentation. If your student leaves, or if you're preparing a deposit, or if something changes, it's something that you can go back to and everyone can know that this is what we decided on. Even if you're working in a small group or in a project by yourself, it's still worth considering, because establishing those data management practices will benefit you in the long term. Because data management plans have advantages beyond their role in grant awards. So they can keep, like I said, everyone on track. It will establish organizations and policies. And by the end of the project, when everyone is disbanding, when you're trying to submit a publication, everybody will know where the data is being stored and where it's being preserved for long-term access. Or if you need to destroy it for some reason because it's sensitive or because you can't share it, you'll be able to have some sort of protocol written out that will allow everyone to know what has happened with your data. Okay. Any questions before I keep moving on? No. I think ultimately, when I think of a data management plan, I think of it in terms of more planning than a one-time plan. It's an evolving document that you need to write for your grant application, right? It's required in some cases, but it's also meant to be a document for yourself as that you reference during your research, that will constantly evolve as you have new questions or if concerns come up, so that everybody is on the same page. The 2 pages are really there for federal funding agencies, but you shouldn't feel like you need to limit yourself to those 2 pages. And as we're going through some of the questions, some of you, if you had started the brainstorm with those 3 major questions, will start going through that in this section about how to write a data management plan, and hopefully you can start fleshing out what exactly you'd like to focus on in your data management plan. So, see, and it's just one of those things that's a kindness to you, to your future self. So where to get started if you want to write a data management plan? I think if you are writing one for a federal funding agency as a requirement with your grant application, it's worth first looking to see if there are any specific requirements for writing a data management plan. So here are some selected federal agencies that do require it. We have the National Science Foundation, we have the National Endowment for the Humanities, Department of Energy, and the National Institute of Health. This is not an exhaustive list. There are more federal funding agencies that do require it, but it's sometimes more spotty. For example, the National Endowment for the Humanities only requires the digital humanities implementation grants have those data management plans. And I just actually wanted to show you how to go ahead and find some requirements if you're wondering, well, where are they? So let me see, let me exit. Hopefully you'll still be able to see my screen here and can see my Google search. So let's go to the National Science Foundation first, because that was one of those granting agencies that did require a data management plan. So if we go here to funding, and we can go by browse by due dates, just because it will give me a list of all the announcements, regardless of discipline. We can go ahead and maybe take a look at this one right here, NSF lead agency activity in electrosynthesis and electrocatalysis for chemistry. So right here under program guidelines, we have a solicitation, which links you to all the requirements for the specific grant. And if you actually follow this and search for management, you will go ahead and get a section about a data management plan. And this one is very, very standard. It's just saying that these are the things we're looking for, but doesn't actually provide you a template. It is worth noting that the National Science Foundation also has an additional document that kind of goes into detail about all of these sections. But let's maybe look at a different one to see if there's something more specific. So for example, let's look at maybe, there was one, like advancing digitization of biodiversity collections. So if we go into this solicitation right here, and we go again into the PDF, and we go into look for data management, this is knowledge management, you'll see a section, the data management plan required by the PAPPG. And I think there is additional information over here under data management plan, which goes ahead and tells you what specific things they want to see. And they actually have an entire piece of documentation that lists out what is the relative information they want you to include when you're submitting your data management plan. So that's that for NSF. If we wanted to go and look at humanities research, I think if we go to NEH.gov, this one only is required for certain grants. I think the humanities innovation grants, I think. So if we look here, if you look at any of these, you might not actually get an additional piece of documentation that will tell you if you need to submit a data management plan. If it's missing, then they're not requiring that of you. But I know there was one right here at the Digital Humanities Advancement Grants that actually does go into it. So if we go and look at the notice of funding and we look for management, we get a section, attachment number 5, data management plans, and it tells you all the information that you need to know. Okay, so going back to our slideshow presentation, if I can find it. There we go. So the first thing, like we said, we want to look at funder requirements to see if they have any other information that you need to include. The second thing that you want to see is, are there any journal requirements? This might be a stretch, but perhaps when you're writing your data management plan or when you're embarking on a research project, there are journals that you know that you want to submit to, or that your colleagues in your department have historically submitted to, and you would also like your publication to be featured in those journals. And it's worth going in and seeing if there are any requirements from that journal that tell you that you need to deposit your data upon manuscript acceptance, because that is something that you can put into your data management plan and something that you can prepare for. So for example, Nature requires authors to make all their material data in code promptly available. And if you follow that link, it actually goes ahead and gives you suggestions for repositories that you can use to deposit your data. I think Nature has their own data repository that they encourage individuals to submit their data to. But in the case that that's not a good repository for them, general purpose repositories like Figshare are also perfectly acceptable. And if you have any questions about repositories or where you can submit or where's the best place to submit your data, I am happy to help you with figuring that piece out. Okay, moving forward. But just so after you've explored those two topics, then you can go and, if there's not a data management plan template or specific requirements, or if you want to flesh out your data management plan, here are some questions that you can use to guide you. So the first thing that you want to do within your data management plan is state what data types will be created and in what file format. So some things, such as like size and accessibility, are things that people typically forget to include. Like, how many files do you anticipate that you're generating? How big are the file sizes? And are you generating things like text files, or are you generating files that rely on specific software in order to access them? And if you are generating files in very specific formats, do you need to convert them into a format that is more readily accessible by someone who doesn't have that piece of software? For example, a popular one is generating spreadsheets in Excel, right? And that gives you an XLSX format. And although that's very popular, if Excel updates to a new version, maybe that version will no longer be accessible, or things will become corrupted. Or maybe if someone doesn't have Excel software, they won't be able to open it. So by converting that file to a CSV, that becomes a more open file that's more readily accessible by other people. So questions that you could potentially ask for this is, what is the source of your data? Who owns it? What are the types of data produced? What are the formats of your data? And are they open, like for example, a CSV file, or proprietary, like that Excel file that we were talking about? What is the size, and how many files will you have? And in addition to that, how quickly do you expect that your data will grow? Is this something that you're going to be front loading and all of your data will be created at once? Or is it something that will happen in more regular intervals? Because that can help you decide on what software, what platform you need in order to support your data. So how quickly will the data be processed, and do you need a specific piece of software or hardware in order to access the data? And is the hardware or software that you're using, or rather software, is that version specific? Because if it's reliant on a specific version, that's something that you might want to put in your data management plan so that other people will be able to access that data. Okay, next section. determining how and in what format documentation will occur. So creating or adopting standard terminology and file naming practices are generally a very good thing, because when you decide on conventions and stick with them, when you're sharing your data with other people, they'll be able to go in and know exactly what each section refers to. It kind of eliminates the guesswork, and it allows for better sorting and smoother transitions if you're reliant on graduate students to collect your data for you and you have a file naming convention. Then if you migrate over, or that student leaves, or responsibilities get shifted, or once the project is done, having decided on file naming conventions allows you to know exactly what those conventions mean. So, are there general standards that would be useful for your project to adopt? For example, a date standard such as ISO 8601. That's the typical year, month, date standard. That's helpful for file sorting, because you have the year, which changes the least, followed by the month, and followed by the day. So everything will always be sorted. Are there any, what kind of measurements are you using? Are you using metric or imperial measurements? What are your abbreviations standing for? Are there any scientific standards in your discipline, such as taxonomies, classifications, or dictionaries that you should be abiding by? Sometimes certain fields have structured metadata schemas that are used by a specific discipline. Should you adopt those and make your documentation very structured? Or is it enough to have like a README file, in which case it's kind of more freeform, but you talk about each component that way? Will you be entering your data into a spreadsheet or into a program? And if you are entering it into a spreadsheet, will you need a code book so that individuals who are using your data in the future will be able to look at the variable name and know exactly what it means and what units were used? And how will you organize your data within a folder or dictionary? What is the most important thing you want to sort on? Do you want to sort on things like date, experiment type, file type, or date modified? Next is defining roles and responsibilities. So who does what and with what frequency? This may be as simple as I do all the things, or if you have a larger team, it might be good to designate responsibilities. So who is responsible for things like nightly backups onto a shared storage to ensure that more than one copy of the data exists, or things like cleanups, and with what frequency, so that you can make sure that your data is in tip-top shape in case you need to share with collaborators. And the most important part, the part that we all forget about documenting, how often is that being done? Is that being done throughout the project, or is that being done at the end of the project? Clearly, some of these questions are very specific and won't necessarily make it into your formal data management plan, which is 2 pages, but it's something that you definitely should keep in the back of your mind or continue writing out for your own purposes. So some questions that you can ask for backup is, where are you backing up your data? How frequently are you backing up? And who is responsible to make sure that the backup is actually happening? For cleaning, are there any unexpected data values that need to be standardized for consistency? And what mechanisms are in place to reduce data entry errors? Is that double entry, where you have one person enter all your data and then a second person enter it to validate? Do you have some sort of data validation structure in place, such as within Excel, where you have certain constraints where only a certain value can be entered? Do data need to be prepared for reporting purposes or for sharing purposes? So how do you decide when everything should be in good shape, or if you need to share it with anyone else? What happens with your outdated files, and who is responsible for all of this and with what frequency? And then documenting. Some questions that you might ask are, what metadata are needed to make the data meaningful? How will you create or capture the metadata? Is that something that's being pushed out by a file that you can just grab? Or is it something that you need to create from scratch? And why have you chosen particular standards and approaches for the metadata? This kind of goes back to when we were talking about, is there like very strict conventions? Are you using a coding manual, or are you just using a README? What are you using to capture this information? Establishing data dissemination and sharing policies. This is after you're done with your project most of the time. So everything we've been talking about was active data storage. And what are you doing with the data as you're collecting it, as you're generating it? This is thinking long term. So for example, data associated with publication needs to be preserved long term for a variety of reasons. For things like things that are as simple as if you're submitting an article to a journal, you might have an option to submit supplementary information to that journal, but the journal is usually not required to keep that supplementary information for a long period of time. So if you do want to maintain access to it, is there a place where you can store it safely? Is there a place for you to store it as demanded by your institution? A lot of institutions require that you keep your data for at least 5 years. Where are you going to put it? And some questions that you can think about are, who owns your data? Who is responsible for making those decisions? And where will your data go? If you're under any obligations to share it, do you anticipate that it needs to be embargoed for a period of time before it could be shared with others? Will others in your discipline be able to find it and access it for longer periods of time? And will it be linked to documentation, articles, codes, and other material that might be located in other places? And is this sustainable? So for example, say you have your data and you plan to put it onto your personal website. Who maintains that website? Who guarantees that someone who is accessing that website will always be able to download your data? And how do you keep that data linked to your article, to your code, which might be in different places? And what happens if you leave the institution and you no longer have control of that website? Who's going to take over? Planning for preservation and archiving. So in this one, we want to think about certain things like planning for the long term, where if you aren't putting things onto your website or onto a platform that's located in the institution, is there a repository that fits your data? Are there any guidelines by the journal that let you know where you should be putting it? How secure is the data? And in what format are you putting it in? And who will be responsible for maintaining that data in the long term? And this last section, I know this is very long and these are a lot of questions and these are a lot of things to think about, but I do want to include this because this is the piece I think that most people tend to miss, and that's funding. So it's always important to consider additional costs for inclusion in the grant proposal. So will you be collecting your own data or using secondary data? Do you need to purchase a data set in order to do your research? If that's the case, maybe you want to put it into your grant proposal. So who will be handling your data and creating documentation? Do you need to hire on additional personnel? Do you need to purchase any specific hardware or software? And then the final piece, do you need, where will you be storing your data in the short term or long term? I think a lot of researchers miss this part because they think the institution is going to provide data storage. And while we do provide some sort of data storage at Western, here we have, I think, OneDrive and Google Drive for the most part, as well as local storage, perhaps you need a different platform in order to collaborate with others across different institutions. Or your file sizes are so big that they exceed being able to be stored on some of these platforms, in which case you should definitely write in data storage into your grant proposal. so that other people at this institution can work with you to get better storage for your needs. Okay, so we've made it to the end of the questions. So I just want you to take a second to think about the questions that you were answering early on in the workshop. So what data do you expect to create or work with? Who will you be dependent on to use or access your data? And what software will you be dependent on? So how does this current list of data needs compare to your initial impressions? Is there something you missed? Is there something that surprised you? Do you have any questions at this point? No? Okay. So just to finish up, I want to talk a little bit about common data management plan mistakes. So I've reviewed a few data management plans here and at previous institutions, and here are some things that come up fairly often. So the first thing is data types are not clearly stated. So people talk about what data they are going to be generating very generally, and they do not say, hey, I'm generating text files and CSVs and images that are PNGs. You need to state what you're going to be generating so we know what formats they're going to be in. In addition, sometimes data volume or additional sharing needs are not taken into consideration. So a lot of the times you have researchers who think, okay, well, the institution will provide the platform so that I can save my data while I'm working on it. And then I'll figure out later what happens to it. But if we think about in terms of can we write those costs into a grant? Because I want to use this sort of platform. I want to use, for example, AWS services on Amazon because I'm generating very large files. If you write it into your grant, then you don't have to worry about, oh, suddenly I had these extra costs that I didn't anticipate for my project. And the final thing is not mentioning any plans after the research activity stops. So a lot of the times when I see data management plans, they talk about, oh, what are we going to do while we're collecting the data? But then once your data collection stops and you're starting to publish, sometimes there'll be mentions about publishing the article. That's not data. Where is your data going? Is it going into a repository? Are there any things that will be done to it to make it reusable and preservable in the long term? And if it can't be shared, because that can happen because data is sometimes sensitive or because it needs to be destroyed, that should be stated in your data management plan as well. What do you anticipate doing with it? Any sort of information. And additional resources that can help you with this. There's a tool called the Data Management Plan tool, which is a resource for you to be able to explore templates that are created by funding agencies, but also explore data management plans that have been written by other individuals at other institutions. So you can see what other people are doing, how they're writing out what their data needs are and how they're addressing it in their data management plan. It can also help you as a tool for just seeing, based on the questions that we talked about, what are they including and what aren't they including? What's clear about their data management plan and what could be elaborated on more, which can help you decide if you need to elaborate on topics more in your data management plan. And another resource is me. Hello, I'm Daria. I'm your data librarian, and I am always open to having you send me a draft along with a funding announcement. And I will go ahead and look through your data management plan. I will give you some feedback within the document. And at that point, we can either communicate through email or we can set up a consultation and we can talk about your changes that need to be made in the data management plan so that it's stronger, as well as any further steps that you'd like to discuss, such as choosing a repository or maybe getting some help with data management, like managing your data throughout the cycle. So I think the biggest takeaway I want you to take from this workshop, and I've been talking at you for a while, and I know you're probably feeling a little bit overwhelmed, is that data management is a process that requires planning and consideration. Identifying your questions and what needs to be addressed is the most important part because it helps you prepare for anything that might come your way and allows you and your colleagues to better understand and reuse the research data in the future. There are a lot of questions, but hopefully there were some that stuck out to you. And as long as you can start with addressing those questions, the rest will kind of come naturally. There's a lot of resources at this university to help you with writing a good grant proposal. And I hope that this workshop, although it has posed a lot of questions, has helped you be less intimidated by the process and kind of given you an overview of what a data management plan looks like and what you're expected to do moving forward. And that's it. We're at, I think, 12:43. I will take any questions that you may have at this point. I will also go and share my slides, and I've created a document with some of the questions for each of the sections in case you're also interested in having a handout for yourself as you're working through this. Thank you.